Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here and welcome back to the railway. Today I'm reviewing an extremely tiny tank engine by Hornby. Today's model has been around for years. In fact, it was first released back in 1984, which means this year, in 2024, the model is 40 years old, and it's still being produced by Hornby to this day. Now, I last reviewed one of these back in 2019, and while it was good value, it didn't cost too much, I basically found that the model was rubbish. It was well out of date, poorly detailed, well, you know, because it's 40 years old. And ultimately, I don't think I'd be reviewing another one today if Hornby hadn't released this in a completely different livery. But today, indeed, I am looking at this, the Hornby L&YR Pug in a maroon livery. Now, I don't know for sure whether this loco has been done in this livery before, but I have never seen it. In fact, I've only ever seen this model produced in a black livery before, yet here it is in a maroon. So well done Hornby, you managed to make me bite, and I guess this will also be a good opportunity to see whether Hornby have updated this 40-year-old model or not, but we shall see. Right, so the price then, the full RRP on Hornby's website is £84.99. That seems a little expensive for a 40-year-old locomotive, but obviously much cheaper than other tank engines that you can buy which are more modern. And at the retailers this is available for around £76, something like that. Now this is quite a bit more expensive than the model was back in 2019 when the RRP was £69.99, and I think I paid about £63 at the retailers. However, obviously there's been a bit of inflation since then, and actually that price increase is pretty much in line with inflation. In fact, it's £1 less than you'd expect given inflation. So even though the price technically has gone up, Hornby haven't really raised the price of this. So let's see if this is any good. The 40-year-old L&YR Pug. Noticeably, this is in a Hornby Railways box, not a Hornby Railroad box, and unless this model has been upgraded significantly, this loco has no business being in Hornby's Railways range, but we shall see. And if you'd like to pick up one of these, I don't know if I'd recommend it or not, but I do have affiliate links in the description for you. For now though, let's take a look. So, first things first, the box does feel extremely light. It feels about the same weight as a Hornby Peckett box, once the Peckett has been taken out of it. And yeah, from what I remember, this is a very light and plasticky model. Anyway, let me show you the end of the box. So the product code for this particular version is R30287. It is in this United Glass Bottle Manufacturers X L&YR livery. It is a Class 21 040 saddle tank Prince, that's the name of this, and it is number 19. And notice on the end of the box here, there is no DCC ready symbol, and yeah, these models are not DCC compatible. Again, why a model that is 40 years old and not DCC compatible is in Hornby's range these days, I have no idea, but yeah, that gives you an idea of how dated this is. Anyway, if I show you the back of the box, you can see we've got the classification here, which is a 0F, so not a powerful loco, and Hornby have ensured that that is the case in model form too by making the loco so light. And then here is your brief history of the class in real life. And because it's Hornby, we've got a nice spelling error here where they call the livery Marron instead of maroon. Now I looked this up just to be fair, and sure enough a Marron is a large Australian freshwater crayfish. So hopefully that is a spelling mistake, otherwise I'm going to get quite a shock when I open the box. But anyway, enough of that. Let's take our first look at this new livery. Okay, let's take the sleeve off, and there it is. You can see the image on the box here is not to scale. The model in the box is obviously quite a bit smaller. And yeah, it does look pretty interesting in this livery. I can see a bit of lining on it, which is good to see. I'm pretty sure my other L&YR Pug doesn't have any lining, so there's definitely a step up in complexity of the livery. Okay, let's take a look at the instructions then. So this is for the Class 21 Pug. Got some generic information on the front. Inside, we've got a section on replacing the locomotive motor, Now that doesn't instill a lot of confidence, does it? That's not something that's usually included in a Hornby instruction manual. But as you can see from the diagram, this is the Hornby Type 7 motor. And yeah, I have known these motors to fail quite readily, actually. I've had a number of locos with this motor that have needed a new motor, so perhaps it was wise for them to include this in the instructions. And as you can see, shows you how to do it. Lubrication, little basic bit about lubrication and where to apply the oil. And then on the back, nothing really of interest. So yeah, no DCC socket and very, very basic instructions. Okay, well, I did see an accessories pack in the top. So let's see what's in here. All right, so this is interesting. We've got some lamps in here. That's a nice inclusion. They do seem to be fairly fine, actually. And then some discs. Are they supposed to be route indicator discs or something? I don't know. Well, they're in a black plastic, so probably not, but I'm not entirely sure. The instructions did not explain what that was for. And then we have this fellow here, which I'm going to call Pointing Preston. I suppose he's supposed to be a driver, unpainted, unfortunately, but you could paint him up and put him in the cab if you wanted to. If there's space, I'm pretty sure there isn't a proper cab space in this loco, but maybe there's room enough for Pointing Preston here, so we will see. But anyway, let's see what the livery is like. The model itself may be 40 years old, but this is a new paint job, so hopefully this has been done with some quality. It is in the railways range after all, not the railroad range, and wow. Yes, we've got a decent finish on here. I remember the last pug I looked at looked very, very plasticky, and this has a much more pleasing finish to it. Yeah, interesting. The handrails, noticeably though, are in a completely different colour. They look kind of purpley, even pinky in places. I don't know whether that mismatch is intentional or not, but it's certainly an interesting look. Okay, let's lift it up. Oh man. Okay, so if you're used to handling the Peckets, this does seem incredibly light by comparison. Yeah, it's a light loco, that's for sure. And that's because, yeah, it's made of plastic, so the body is all plastic, running plate, etc. I believe even the chassis on this loco is plastic as well, although I will verify whether or not that's true in just a second. So yeah, I like the livery, that looks good. The rest of the model seems to be much as it was before. You can see underneath, no NEM couplings, you've just got these large sort of D-shaped ones, not as large as some of them, but still pretty large and not NEM either. So yeah, a very obviously dated loco, even from first glance really, but I will show you some of the details, or I guess lack thereof, in just a second. But for now, here's a little bit of background on these locos in real life. The L&YR Pug was first introduced way back in 1886, and it was also known as the L&YR Class 21. Intended for shunting work, the class can be traced right back to the purchase of 3 saddle tank engines ordered from the Vulcan Foundry in 1886. Following the success of these, John Aspinall placed an order for more to be built to a slightly modified design. Over the next 25 years, a total of 60 engines would be built, and when they passed into LMS ownership following the grouping of 1923, they were given the power classification of 0F. Despite not being very powerful, they were perfect for tight radius curves and for shunting duties where a nimble locomotive was required. This example Prince was sold by the LMS into industry, and it ended up with the United Glass Bottle Manufacturers in 1967, and more recently it was restored by the East Lancashire Railway, I believe, and it is now back in working order as LMS number 11243, which is its original number. As for the rest, withdrawal took place over several years. The first ones were retired in 1910, although as many as 23 survived as late as 1957. In total, only 2 have been preserved, while the remainder were sadly scrapped. So there it is, up close and personal for you. Not a freshwater crayfish from Australia, but a locomotive, as expected. And as much as I'm glad that this is not a fish, it's still not a particularly impressive locomotive. It's not well detailed, and it's not accurate to Prince, the loco this is supposed to depict. Now, yeah, this is an affordable loco. It only costs £84.99 at the full RRP, so it is cheaper than a lot of models, but I would say this is not cheap enough to offset how pretty poor this model is. It is, after all, only about £15 away from the Hattons / Acura Scale P-Class and Andrew Barclay, and those models are vastly superior to this model. So yes, it's nice to see a model in Hornby's range that is affordable. That is a rare thing from Hornby these days, but affordable doesn't have to mean naff. And this really is naff now. I mean, it's from 1984, so it's going to be. Obviously, models have come a long way since then. It's just confusing that this is in Hornby's 2024 range. I don't think it belongs here, and it certainly doesn't belong in the Hornby Railways range. But first of all, let's talk about the inaccuracies in the model, of which there are many. So we've got the handrails all across the model which do not match in colour with the rest of the body. Now, I can't find any colour photos of this in real life, so maybe that is accurate. I also haven't found any references though to the handrails being pink, so I think more than likely this is just an error in the model. Although if you do know better, please do comment down below and let me know. This box on the running plate though is in the wrong position for prints. That would be further back on the running plate, so that is an error, as is the number board on the front of the smoke box there. Prints shouldn't have one of those, yet this has just been left on and it's undecorated, so not very realistic either. I guess the elephant in the room is the cab. Instead of actually having a proper cab interior, we've just got the motor clear as day with its capacitor clearly in view, and they haven't even bothered to manage the wires. Those are just left to dangle throughout the rest of the cab. Now again, that just dates this model massively. Today it would be easily possible to pop the motor in the boiler underneath the tanks here and have the cab space more realistic. This looks absolutely awful. Now sure, you could get Pointing Preston and try and put him in there amongst the wires, hopefully his arm won't get tangled in them, but really that would be like putting lipstick on a pig, wouldn't it? Unless somebody comes along who's blind, a black unpainted crew figure standing in the cab is not going to disguise the fact that there is no detail back there. The next thing to talk about is the weight and the construction. So yeah, plastic through and through. Really cheap feeling, and obviously really light feeling as well. So it weighs in shockingly at 75 grams. Now compare that with the similarly sized Hornby Peckett. That thing weighs 128 grams, so the Pug here is more than 50 grams lighter than the Peckett. 50 grams for a model that is so small. It's actually quite an achievement to make this as light as it is. So yeah, very plasticky. The parts don't fit together brilliantly. The way the cab interfaces with the running plate isn't dreadfully convincing. The livery though, I think is actually pretty good. Like I say, the finish looks good. We've got a fair satin sheen to that. That is better than the model has looked in the past. We've also got the name, which is nicely printed onto the side. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And a fair bit of lining. I've actually never had one of these Pugs with anywhere close to this much lining on it, and all of this has been done excellently, even down to the cylinders and even the LMS builder's plate on the side of that box, which is in the wrong place. Let's take a look at some of the detailing then. So starting with the wheels, yeah, you've got your basic plastic wheels with the axles unpainted and fairly chunky looking coupling and connecting rods. And an interesting feature of these Pugs is that the crosshead is hidden behind a cover, which I think makes this loco pretty unique, at least in my collection, so that's a point of interest. The buffer beams have dumb buffers as per the prototype. Again, that makes this pretty unusual in Hornby's range. And while we do have coupling hooks fitted to the buffer beam, this one is wonky and has visible glue around it, there are no 3-link couplings for you to fit instead. So again, that shows how basic this is. The smoke box area looks incredibly poor on this model. These valves look pretty good from the front, but from the side, they look awful because they're just extruded from the body. Really bad looking. We've also got the smoke box dart, which is just a part of the moulding. Again, not particularly convincing. The handrails would be decent if they weren't mismatched in colour, because they are made of wire and they are straightly fitted, which is good to see. The top of the model though has a pretty ugly seam line across it, and the moulding is really getting quite long in the tooth here, as you can see. Although the water filler cap here appears to be a separate part, so that actually looks pretty good. On the front we've got, I guess this would be the whistle, just a plastic piece, not particularly convincing. And here's a look up on top of the cab where we've got what I suppose must be the safety valves. Around the back we do have some glazing in the cab windows, and in fact we do on the front as well. Yeah, the windows are glazed for all the difference that makes. And then the steps on the back of the cab here are just a part of the moulding. No real separately fitted detail on here. One area that I think does look good on the model though is the area underneath the tanks. We've actually got a fair bit of pipe work here as well as a reverser, not made of metal or anything, but yeah, there is some definition at least in these parts. And there's even a suspension spring here above the front axle, which you can see quite well. But ultimately, the level of detail and accuracy of the model is really disappointing. I would not recommend paying £84.99 or even £75 or so at the retailers, because the model is just not worth it. Again, why Hornby wanted to bring this model back, I have no idea, because this would make a fantastic new tooled project. Can you imagine this with a nice up-to-date chassis with a DCC socket and a motor in the boiler, nice detailed cab, die-cast tanks, all that weight, all that quality, so many opportunities to add nice little details. Please, somebody do that. I would love to see it instead of this very, very ancient model. So yeah, not impressive. I think we've talked long enough about this now, so let's get it down onto the track, let's see how it runs, and let's also talk about the mechanism and its features. The latter topic there shouldn't take very long, but let's get started nevertheless. So there she is, Prince, down onto the track. And I know I've not been very positive about this loco so far, and that's certainly not going to change as I go on to talk about performance. But I must say I do quite like the livery on this loco. I think it's a nice change from the plain blacks, and it does kind of breathe a bit of a new lease of life into an otherwise very dated loco. Obviously the loco's still extremely dated. A nice livery isn't going to change that, but at least it changes things up a little bit. Anyway, talking of performance, I've already filmed the initial performance test and running in, and it did not go well. In fact, the loco did not work properly. It was running in an extremely laboured way. There was something definitely wrong. So, for full disclosure, I did not let this loco run in before I did my disassembly. I decided to do the disassembly and mechanism section early, just so that I could check over the loco, see what was wrong, and maybe try to rectify it. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So with that, let's talk about the mechanism. First of all, the pickups have been changed. This is an upgrade. So previously, these models had pickups up inside the chassis, one wiper per wheel. Well, now, as you can see, the pickups have been moved to the base keeper plate, and there are two wipers per wheel, which on the surface of things looks like an upgrade. Yeah, it looks better. But the way that this has been done is really quite a bodge, and you'll see why when I take the base keeper off. Removing the base keeper then is just a case of taking these two screws out, and then it comes off reasonably easily. You can see that there are no bearings on the driving axles, and in fact the chassis itself is just plastic. It's pretty rare to see an entirely plastic chassis, one that's not die-cast, but yeah, here we have it. For a loco struggling in weight, even for the 1980s, that seems like a very strange design decision. This is the extent of the gearing. We've got a worm drive coupled directly to the motor, which interfaces directly with the driving gear, so there's nothing more complicated than that. But then here's the bodgy pickup solution. So you can see the wires here for the pickups. They actually have to stretch from the chassis over the rear axles, past the driving gears, and then are soldered to the base keeper plate. What a bodge that is! There's a potential there for those wires to foul against the axles, cause friction and drag, or possibly, worst case scenario, even get caught up and tangled around the worm drive there. Who in their right mind puts pickup wires over moving axles like that? I don't know. So yeah, it's an improvement in terms of the number of pickups, but I think this could be one of the potential reasons why this loco didn't run right. So to try and get around that, I took the loco cab off and then gently pulled the slack out of those wires to try and make sure they wouldn't touch the worm drive. So here is the motor on the chassis. It's a 3-pole motor with no flywheel. Yeah, it's one of those really cheap motors that you yourself can buy direct from China for less than £2, something like that. Obviously no DCC socket on board, no lighting, no speakers, nothing like that, no features whatsoever. It's just wheels, a motor and a couple of gears. You can also see that the motor is fitted extremely loosely. The main screw that holds the motor in place isn't tightened, which just leaves the motor to wobble like this. I don't know how you can expect a motor's worm drive to mesh correctly with the rest of the gears when it's free to move like this. So I did tighten that up, although when fully tightened, even then the motor gear did not mesh with the driving gear properly. So there's just something fundamentally wrong here. What I did in the end was loosen that screw slightly, not as loose as it was from the factory, but slightly, and now the loco is performing better than it was to start with. So that's another potential issue. You've got a motor mounted onto a plastic chassis. You know, you need that die cast to hold that motor steady so that the worm drive is in exactly the right spot. Yeah, it's just frustrating. Why is such an old and outdated mechanism still being produced? Not worth 85 quid or even 75, definitely not. And then the gauge comes in at 14.2 millimeters back to back, which is just below the standard, and for a short wheelbase loco that's got to handle tight curves, yeah, that seems absolutely fine. So, time to jump back in time then and show you the disaster that was this loco trying to perform for the first time. Okay, time for that first test then. So I've not run this model yet. This will be its first ever run, and obviously I will let this run in for 30 minutes in either direction before coming to any conclusions on the performance. But straight out of the box, what is it like? Here we go, forwards direction. Here's a little bit of power. Here we go. That's at 50. Okay. Ground to a halt. Let's go into reverse at 50. Oh, full power? Yeah, something's not right with that. Or is it? Well, it seems to be coming to life a little bit, but let me just make sure nothing's binding here. No, the wheels do seem to be loose. There's nothing sort of obviously stuck. So let's see if we can't just kind of get this to come to life a bit. This is at full power. Okay. Stopping on the points. Dear, oh dear. Full power still. Yeah, it's like there's some sort of massive amount of friction somewhere here. Let's go past at 50. Let's see if it can actually go at 50 now. Ready? Forwards, 50. It stalled. It stalled again. Wow. This thing really sucks. Wow. Well done, Hornby. What a piece of kit this is. I don't know if you could sort of almost mishear that sentence, couldn't you? And it would sound like something else a little bit more accurate. But a piece of kit is the phrase that I will stick with. Alright. So I'm actually not too sure what to do for the best here. I'm not too sure whether I should run this in, or try to, or to take it apart first and just make sure that there's nothing obviously wrong. Because I'm very conscious of the fact that the motors are a little bit fragile in these, shall we say. And if there is something causing masses of friction in here, I don't want it to burn that motor out. But yeah, to be fair, I don't think I'm going to be able to run this in anyway, because even at full speed it does kind of keep stopping and stalling. Yes, on the points, but also not just on the points. So I guess I will film the mechanism section now and come back to the running in, maybe. Obviously I wouldn't usually do that, because obviously if I do something by mistake during the disassembly and then it ruins the performance, then you know that's my fault and it's not fair to then review the loco for its poor performance. But I've not done anything at this point, and I think it's going to damage it to keep running it like this. So yeah, I'm going to go and do the disassembly now. I guess at this point you might even know more about this than I do, because I will have already showed you that section. But yeah, I'll do it, then I'll come back and we'll try performance again. Alright, so with some tweaks, I think I have been able to make the performance somewhat acceptable now. And I think the cause of the poor performance is probably a combination of things. Really not a good design here. So we've got the new aspect of the design, which has the new pickup wires strewn across the exposed loco axle. I think it's very possible that if these aren't assembled just right, that wire could foul that axle or possibly even get caught around the worm drive or the main driving gear. Why anybody would design a loco like that, I don't know, but there you have it. Then of course you've got the plastic chassis, and the soft nature of the plastic means that the motor isn't always held in exactly the right position, so the position of the worm drive in relation to the driving gear can vary. That's the last thing you want. That's why, you know, we make loco chassis out of metal, not cheap plastic. So motor position, yeah, that's a big one. The screw to hold the motor was just completely loose. The motor was left to flop all over the place. The motors are supposed to be held in a very specific position so that the worm gear meshes correctly. How can it do that with so much give on the motor? And yes, tightening up the motor screw did improve that, but when the screw is fully tight, again, the motor doesn't seem to be able to run, so I've had to loosen it off a little bit. It's a complete bodge job. This thing might have been acceptable in the mid-1980s, but here in 2024, with some of the other mechanisms we've got, for not that much more money, this thing is a completely inexcusable mess. And the fact that this is running well now is thanks to me and my troubleshooting and my tweaking. Now, I can't say for sure that all of them are going to be like this. In fact, that's probably not the case. But what I can say is that the design of the mechanism seems poor enough so that I wouldn't be surprised if these issues do crop up on a regular basis. But like I say, I've only tried one, so if you've got one of these pugs, from the new batch that is, with the so-called upgraded pickups, how does it run? Please do let me know. But yeah, I should be able to run this in now. It does constantly stop on the points, but I will now run this in forwards and backwards, and then hopefully I'll be able to come back and finish the review. So don't go anywhere, I'll be back in just a sec. Alright, well, what a fun time that was. Yeah, constant stoppages on the express points. Now, on the one hand, you know, that's fair enough. This loco is obviously not meant for express points. It's a small shunting loco with a short wheelbase. You can expect a bit of cutting out on points like mine. However, on the other hand, I have plenty of these short wheelbase 040s that perform much better on these points. Usually that's because they have better mechanisms, more reliable pickups, and in some cases a flywheel, which means that even if the power is cut off during the loco's travel over the points, that flywheel can keep the motor turning long enough so that the loco doesn't stop before power is reinstated. Obviously, with the cheap motor in this model and the lack of flywheel, it just stops dead immediately on those points, and that just causes it to stall, basically. Other than that though, yeah, it is running a lot better now. It's obviously not running in the same laboured way as it was before. Yeah, it's even, dare I say it, slightly smooth now, which is a real bonus from a brand new loco, isn't it? But otherwise, yeah, the performance isn't the greatest. I mean, I suppose we should start from scratch here and go over everything. So let me show you the speed and gearing to start with. We'll go past at 50, so here's that. It's sensibly geared, which is surprising because there's virtually no gearing in it, as we've seen. But yeah, there's certainly nothing wrong with the speed of this, and I've checked my other pug, which you'll see later on, and yeah, that one runs at about the same sort of speed, so it's not running slow due to a fault, unless they're both faulty. But no, that does seem to be as intended, so that's pretty good. What is the torque like? I'll turn this up to 50% speed with my fingers in front of the dumb buffers. Here we go. So as you can see, not much really. It is able to turn its wheels, it doesn't stall, but it does slow down quite dramatically. Now, for a loco that weighs 75 grams, that's not really what you'd expect. You'd expect this to turn its wheels effortlessly under that lighter load, but yeah, it does seem to struggle a bit, which is, well, it is what it is. Slow speed and crawl then, I've not been able to try this yet, but obviously it is now fully running, so we can give that a try. So let's back it up, let's try forwards first, see what this is like. I'm turning it up. Oh, yeah, there we go. So as you can see, it's pretty slow. I think it did stop there, but it seems to have pulled it back a bit. So yeah, it's slow. These motors historically are pretty good for crawling. but obviously it doesn't have a flywheel and it is only a 3-polar, so as you can see it is a little bit coggy. Let's turn it up a bit. Yeah, a little bit jerky as you can see. And I think it has now stalled. Let's turn it up a bit. Yeah, it's stalled. So it can do it, but it's just not reliable enough to maintain it. Although at that speed it is pretty smooth, so that's not bad. Let's turn it into reverse and see if it's any different. There we go. So yeah, pretty good, I would say. Yeah, it's not a bad crawl at all, this. I think it's definitely more the other performance issues that have let this down. But yeah, that's actually quite surprising and way better than it was to start with. I did do a bit of a crawl test off camera once this was working properly before I ran it in, and it was nowhere near as good as this. It was struggling and stuttering, not able to sustain it. It's actually way better now. Yep, it's crawling a lot better. So the performance isn't too bad when working properly, but I'm not entirely sure what I did to fix it. Obviously I tweaked a few things. Which of the issues was the one that was actually causing the problems, I'm not sure, but it could have been either of them, the position of the motor or the dodgy wires touching the axles. I'm not too sure, but anyway, pulling power is not very inspiring, as you'd expect, so the tractive effort is 0.06 newtons. That's not so surprising, like I say, because it only weighs 75 grams. That should allow this to haul about 8 coaches on straight and level track. And also because, as I've mentioned, these motors do tend to be a little bit flaky, particularly when they're under load. I've decided not to stretch this loco too much today, I suppose, especially given the issues I had to start with. So I've just put a small goods train together. I got some milk tankers there, a van, a couple of wagons, a brake van, just to show this loco hauling something and also to test the couplings. So with that, let's back up. Let's see how we get on. And it's stalled. Yeah, it's such a shame because the crawl's actually pretty good. It just doesn't really get to show it off because of how it constantly stalls. But anyway, let's give it a nudge, see if we can get it to couple nicely. There we go. So as I mentioned at the start, this loco does not have NEM couplings, and the couplings fitted to the model, they're not even the modern slim style. So again, that just dates the model and shows Hornby's unwillingness to update it. And yeah, the coupling hook hasn't engaged there, has it? Pull it forward. No, it's it's too far over to the left-hand side to engage with a modern hook, although I think it has just dropped in. So yeah, again, for a shunting loco, no NEM couplings and dated large tension locks. It's not a good look. It's not a smart decision, is it really? But it has coupled, so with that, let's go forwards. It's going to have to be 50, otherwise it's going to keep stalling. So let's go at half power. Let's see how it gets on. Okay, so there she goes. No doubt she's going to stop on probably at least one of these points. Well, there we go, as predicted. But we'll let her keep going. I'll bring in my black version of this Pug model. There she goes on the second express point. Interestingly, this black one, despite only having one pickup per wheel, it still seems to be more reliable. As you'll see, it keeps stopping on the points, but it kind of recovers. The red one just doesn't. It's just dead completely. So yeah, it's had an upgrade on pickups, but it's no better, in fact, slightly worse. And then on the inside line, I've got the Hornby Peckett in a similar sort of maroon livery to Prince. And the reason I've chosen to run this today is because this is the kind of standard that I'd love to see Hornby produce a new L&YR Pug to. Yeah, die-cast body, quality modern motor that fits in the, well, tanks, not in the cab. Looks so much better, more proper separate detailing. It's just miles and miles better, and yet that model doesn't have to break the bank either. So yeah, time to upgrade the Pug or withdraw it. Alright, so as you see, apart from the issue with the points, the performance now is actually pretty decent. It's nice and smooth, not doing bad with a load, although we'll see how it gets on up Gordon's Hill. And that leaves me with a bit of a conundrum in terms of ratings, because obviously it's running pretty well now, but I've had to do quite a lot to it to get it to this stage. Really, I should be rating it as it was out of the box, but out of the box, this one was ungradable in terms of performance because it just wasn't running properly. So I think what I'll do is I'll kind of put it somewhere in between the two to reflect the fact that it didn't work properly to start with, but with a bit of tinkering, yeah, it can be made to be a decent performer, although admittedly not quite comparable to more recent and premium models. So what can I say about it? Well, frankly, it's the kind of model that you would see second hand and pick it up for 20 quid knowing that it's 40 odd years old. I really don't think this is the sort of model that I would recommend buying new for 75 or even 85 pounds at the full price. It just doesn't seem like a smart thing to do. If mine's anything to go by, and it might not be, you know, this could be a faulty example, others might be better assembled so that they work properly out of the box. But frankly, even without the performance issues, I can't say that this is a loco I would recommend. I mean, it just doesn't look that realistic, it's dated, the details are poor, the mechanism is shoddy, the motor is cheap. I just think you could put that £85 to better use. Even a second-hand loco that was produced more recently is probably going to give you less issues again, if my model is anything to go by. On a more positive note, I suppose if you've got some nostalgia for this model, you may enjoy seeing this back in a different livery. It might bring back some decent memories for you. Yeah, that's valid. The livery certainly is lovely. It's possibly the best aspect of the model now, because that aspect of the model doesn't date back 40 years, that's been done more recently. So if you want one of these because of the livery, then yeah, maybe I could recommend it, but certainly don't stand for any of the nonsense that I've stood for today. If it's causing you jip, just send it back, it's not worth it. Alternatively, I can't see these selling out anytime soon unless the size of the batch was absolutely tiny. So if you're interested in one of these, I'd probably recommend just waiting. Maybe the prices will come down a bit. If they're more like 50 quid or something like that, then I think it's easier to overlook some of the issues. And equally, if they do sell out and they never get reduced meaningfully, well, you've not missed out on very much, have you? And then at least that way you can perhaps save the money up and hope that another manufacturer, or even Hornby themselves, will produce a new tooled version of this. And then no doubt that would be way better. But yeah, this one, not much good. I think really it's just a quick and dirty attempt to cash in on an extremely old tooling, and I wouldn't recommend spending your hard-earned cash on it. In terms of Hornby, obviously I want to give them right to reply on this video, so if they've got any feedback on it, or if they want to get in touch with me with any thoughts on my review or this model, they'd be welcome to do that, and I will feature their thoughts in a future video if they choose to. But for now, I think that's pretty much all I've got to say about this. And now some ratings then on the Hornby L&YR Pug, or ex-L&YR Pug in this case, the 2024 version of the model. Now, I reviewed one of these 5 years ago, back in 2019, and if memory serves, I gave it a kind of middle-of-the-road moderate score. And here we are in 2024, 5 years later. There have been 5 more years of development that's gone into model railways, models getting better and better all of the time. And here is this model without any meaningful upgrades and working considerably less well than the version 5 years ago that I reviewed. So for now, level of detail, I've given 1.5 star. Poor moulding quality, not impressive really. Complete lack of interior cab detail. You've got mismatching colours on the handrails versus the body, and detail inaccuracies for this particular version of the model. On the plus side, we do have a decent paint finish, and I like the lining and decoration on it, so it doesn't get 0, but otherwise I think it probably should. Performance is really disappointing. Obviously, first of all, it hardly worked to begin with, and I had to do all sorts of tinkering and adjusting to the model before it would even run half decently. Not the best torque in the world, it stops on points, and it's really not that smooth. It's not a great performer, 2 star is the best I can do. Pulling power, well, this is not the best either. It's about the same as a Hornby Lion, so 0.06 newtons or 8 coaches on straight and level track, and that's due to its incredibly light weight of 75 grams. Yeah, it's really not going to be able to haul very much. The mechanism here in 2024 is a 1 star for me. Plastic chassis, extremely poor quality that. What loco doesn't have a die-cast chassis? I don't know. No proper bearings on the driving axles, wires everywhere where they shouldn't be as well, around the axles, in the cab where they're visible, just really sloppy. 3-pole motor with no flywheel, no DCC socket, no lighting or speakers fitted, etc. It is the most bare bones mechanism you can imagine, and it really doesn't work that well, or at least it didn't on my example. Quality then, I've given it a middle of the road 3-star. I think the quality of the decoration is pretty good. It's been well applied, and like I say, I like the finish. However, the rest of the model is really shoddy. It's plasticky right the way down to the chassis. So many details that are just moulded, they don't look the best. Loose motor, which was free to wobble around in there. Lightweight, like I say, incredibly light. Yeah, I think 3-star is generous, but I guess the quality is the one thing this model does best, and that's not much of a compliment. Value for money then, £84.99 is the current full price, or at the retailers you can pick these up for about £76.49. Well, I say about, that's quite specific. Well, that's 3-star for me. 5 years have gone by since I last bought one of these, and accounting for inflation, the price has stayed the same. I think when you consider all of the development and improvement that we've seen in model railways in that time, this model is even poorer value now than it was 5 years ago. It's a 40-year-old model now, and it really shows. Time to withdraw this model from the range, I think. It's not right taking people's money for something like this, at least I don't think it is. And if Hornby want to sell these models, I think that would be great to see, but let's have it retooled, let's have it brought to 2024 standards, and then it might be worth £85, or perhaps even 100, maybe 120, I don't know, but I think this is a waste of time, frankly. So overall that is 4.09 out of 10. Yeah, that is lower than my 2019 score, because it's even more dated now. And I didn't have as many performance issues with the 2019 one. Yeah, this one was a real pain actually. So the grade is a big fat fail. Yeah, I would not recommend this. There are plenty of other 040 shunting engines out there that are more suitable for the job. And it's not like this one is even in an LMS livery either. I know there's not that many LMS shunting locos out there, but this is in an industrial livery, and there's tons of those to choose from. Hornby produce quite a few themselves, the Peckets for instance. Buy a Pecket, 10 times better, not even that expensive. Into the logbook it goes then, where it is 24th place, above that weird Beatles pack that Hornby did, and below the Railroad Plus 1400 class, which was similarly inadequate. Yeah, not a big fan of this. I think this is certainly the last of the Hornby pugs I will buy, unless of course they choose to retool it. Well folks, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing this review, even if you didn't enjoy seeing the model. And please do share your thoughts with me on this. Obviously this model is cheaper than most, so maybe you think the downfalls of this model are represented in the price tag. Do you think that? So if you think that, and you think this model's not as bad as I think it is, do let me know. Obviously these are just my thoughts, and you may well feel differently. So yeah, is this model not that bad? Let me know what you think, but I think I've made my feelings pretty clear on this, and again, if you agree with me, do comment down below and let me know. But for now, I'll say thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Alright, cheers folks, you take care.